Hi, everyone. I am just so excited to be here and talk about how much I love Greg Berlanti and Sarah Schechter. They are two of the most valiant warriors fighting the greatest battle of our time, the streaming wars. And tell the Hollywood people are all right here. Everyone says that there's too much to watch these days, and 90% of it is produced by Greg and Sarah. Luckily, they use their superpowers for good. People in Hollywood love to talk about being progressive change makers, but it's another thing to actually do it. You won't believe the number of meetings I've had where people wax poetic about wanting to make things that really matter and have a bold message, and then the bold message is like, she's a princess, but she has attitude. And meanwhile, Sarah and Greg are out here creating genuinely bold, envelope-pushing content that spans races, gender identities, sexual orientation. I mean, first gay superhero to headline a show, first recurring transgender character on TV, first legal gay marriage on network TV, first transgender superhero on TV, and they hired me, the very first Jewish director. Affecting real change is not only about telling stories that push boundaries, it's also about making that content engaging and accessible, which is why Greg and Sarah and our other producer, Eric Feig, sought the rights to a book called Unpregnant, a story about a girl who must take a 1,000-mile journey to get an abortion. But in true Berlanti-Schechter fashion, it's not dour or depressing, it's exciting and funny and surprisingly heartwarming. I had my first meeting to direct the film with Sarah and was immediately in love. Sarah is the only person I know who's angrier than me about the injustices we face. She gets real fired up. She fought for the movie and its bold message, bold pro-abortion stance at every stage, and still hits the streets to protest. She's also a caring, funny, generous person who's championed my work with an enthusiasm that rivals my dad's, which is a lot. In my first meeting with Greg, I was very nervous because he's Greg fucking Berlanti. I know that wouldn't have scared Paula Poundstone, but it did scare me. But he was disarmingly warm and collaborative and just like really nice, which is actually pretty weird in Hollywood. And we talked through the script, and I was incredibly blown away by not only his incredible story and character instincts, but also his true passion for the issue. He mentioned he found it baffling that you need parental consent to get an abortion, but not to have a baby. That observation struck me. I found it super compelling. It was a thing I knew intuitively, but I hadn't heard it framed just like that. So, of course, went right into the script. And that's emblematic of how Greg and Sarah's art breaks through to people, presenting something both simple and bold, sharp and accessible. Making that film was a huge honor for me. As I told Sarah in that first meeting, I've had an abortion. I basically try to tell that to everyone that I possibly can whenever I can. And I'm proud that the project not only critiques abortion restrictions, but also presents a viewpoint we don't see enough. Like the main character, I was confident in my choice. There was no pro and con list. It was not a heartbreaking decision. I've never had a moment of regret. And I am just so grateful to share that perspective with the world, and particularly with young people. Of course, there has been a slight change in abortion law since our film came out. Abortion is a civil liberty, and we've been stripped of it by a rogue Supreme Court. It's unacceptable, and we must fight at every level in every way we can. I know Sarah will continue to hit the streets, and we're currently collaborating on another abortion project aimed at our current moment, and I'm just so grateful to have these passionate partners by my side. And I'm not just saying that because they've been responsible for most of my paychecks for years now. Changing culture is the path to changing policy and creating a better world, which is why the work that Greg and Sarah do is so crucial. So it is my immense honor to present the ACLU SoCal Bill of Rights Award to my friends and two people I deeply admire, Greg Berlanti and Sarah Schechter.
Hello, everyone. I'm sorry I can't be there in person tonight. I'm honored to be sharing this award with my amazing and brilliant partner, good friend, Sarah Schechter. When the ACLU first asked Sarah and I about this incredible honor, I didn't know I'd be landlocked in Atlanta directing a film, and even if I was there, I would be smart enough not to give a speech about civil rights anywhere close to where Sarah Schechter was doing the same thing. I grew up a closeted gay kid in the 80s. during the beginning of the AIDS crisis and was realizing I was gay just as generations of gay men above me were dying from this horrible disease, crying out for help. As a child, I watched communities, government officials, and most of the nation at large turn their back on them, but not the ACLU. They were there for the disenfranchised as they have always been and always will be. In fact, today, in what seems like an impossible dream, I'm a married gay man with 2 children, and I enjoy many rights that LGBTQIA individuals didn't have when I was growing up. I marvel at the progress that we as a nation have made since then, thanks in large part to those who work at and volunteer for the ACLU, but I'm hyper aware of 3 things. 1, we couldn't have made any progress at all without the ACLU fighting and being at the front of that fight. 2, there are still too many individuals who don't share the rights I have been so fortunate to gain in my lifetime. People who are still not equal. And 3, this is the first time in my life the fight isn't about how to move forward. It's to stop those in power that wish to take us backwards. We are not going backwards. I consider myself more of a storyteller than an activist, but in the stories I've been lucky to be a part of in my 25 years in the business, I've gotten to write and tell stories about abortion and gender and race issues and immigration and LGBT plus issues. And I've gotten to champion others to share and tell their stories and their truth, and hopefully to help better reflect the world we live in and to help create a world I would want to live in. There's no organization I can think of that works harder to create a world we all want to live in than the ACLU. They're helping create an equal society for all of us, where a trans kid growing up today who might be feeling the same feelings that I was feeling in the 1980s, discovering who they are just as some in the world are waging war on them or telling them they're not equal. Every day someone at the ACLU is thinking about that child, fighting for that child, and it's all of our job to help give the ACLU the resources they need to do that. Thank you for this honor. Thank you for all who came and donated. Thank you to Sarah for being a daily inspiration to myself and all she works for. And most importantly, thank you to the ACLU for helping create this amazing life that I get to live and be a part of, and a world that I get to live in and be a part of, and for all the work that you do all the time. You've made the world such a better place. I appreciate this and this honor and all of you. Thank you.
You better hold on to that. My mother, Valerie, who is here tonight, grew up before Roe v. Wade in a town where a local 19-year-old girl named Barbara LaFremento got pregnant. Barbara's mother drove her to the city to a safe doctor to have an abortion, but Barbara never made it home. She bled to death alone on a table. The knowledge of Barbara's death hung heavily over my mom as she made her own journey to get an illegal abortion years later. She risked her life because she did not want a child at that moment or with that man. I am grateful every day for her courage, because if she had been forced to carry that fetus, her life would have looked very different. She wouldn't have been in college where she met my father. I wouldn't have been born at all. I am here on this earth because of an abortion. And her story was never going to be my story, since I was born after Roe v. Wade. These stories felt like they came from a different, arcane, cruel universe, and yet here we are, and I wish I was more surprised. This country was built on the shallow, often unmarked graves of indigenous people and kidnapped people of color. The soil is rancid and the original sins are deeply felt. We have always been a hypocritical country. The biggest lie this country ever told is also our sweetest dream. All men are created equal. A beautiful concept that has always had invisible but fully understood caveats. All men, meaning all white, heterosexual, landowning men, are created equal to one another, but superior to all others, which is less inspiring, but certainly more honest. But there have always been people who have pushed this country to do better, to be better, to live up to its potential without caveats, to treat all people equally and fairly, full stop. The ACLU has been at the very center of this fight for over 100 years. They stand on principle. We have yet to achieve equality, but there have been significant steps forward in terms of freedom since the ACLU was formed. Certain systemic barriers to opportunity have been addressed, and among the greatest was the right to choose whether you wanted to give birth. We no longer have that right. Thanks to the intense focus of a minority of Americans who are hell-bent on legislating people's wombs, half of our country no longer enjoys equal rights in this country anymore. Abortion is undeniably about controlling the bodies and futures of women and people with wombs. It is also most certainly about maintaining cycles of poverty and denying opportunity, particularly for people of color and people in economically depressed areas. We keep people in metaphorical chains in this country to this day. It is worth comparing which states had slavery and which states have banned abortion. There is a significant overlap. I am looking at you, Alabama, Arkansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, Tennessee, and Texas. I am an American. I love the ideals of democracy and the idea of equal rights. I love what the ACLU does because it fights for civil liberties. My parents were very active in the civil rights movement, and I was taught from an early age that the true marker of freedom is not defined by who has the most, but by who has the least. And right now, there are a lot of fucking people who have no power or autonomy over their own bodies or their futures. There's a 10-year-old victim of rape who became pregnant in Ohio, 10 years old, and she couldn't get an abortion without traveling to Indiana, a 5th grader. And the doctor who performed that operation was scared for her own life. In Florida, a court said that an orphaned 16-year-old was, quote, not mature enough to get an abortion. An orphaned 16-year-old. Honestly, though, this isn't all because Roe fell. There has been a generation-long concerted effort that inspired us to make the film Unpregnant a couple years ago. That film was shot in a world where Roe stood, but laws that made it nearly impossible for teenagers or people without economic means to access reproductive care already existed all around the country. We hoped Unpregnant would someday be seen as science fiction, that it would feel dated to show in America where there was so many barriers to health care, that it would seem unfathomable to audiences in the future, that it would be so hard to make choices about your own body. We were wrong. What makes Unpregnant dated is how easy it was for our heroine to access care. She didn't face the threat of criminal prosecution. She didn't fear being jailed. Now she would have to. When we set out to make Unpregnant, every major studio passed on developing it. Female executives would whisper, "My boss will never make this. We can't even talk about abortion in our films." It just made me more determined to get the film made because I refused to accept that a common dilemma easily half of the population of our country could face, one that 70% of Americans support access to, was controversial. We eliminate shame when we are honest in our portrayals. We create empathy, compassion, and we allow others to understand human experiences that are not our own. There is no shame in abortion. The shame is in how many people think it is something to be ashamed of. Telling these stories about the human condition, about the diversity of human experiences, allows us all to better connect with one another and to burn away judgment and bias. I know that I've focused heavily on Roe v. Wade today, and that's only a fraction of the important and incredible work that the ACLU has done for a century. They have been at the center of every important civil rights action for the last 100 years. They have been in every key courtroom because they know the courts are the true battlegrounds for our least protected citizens. Their track record is incredible, from the Scopes trial to Brown v. Board of Education, from Lawrence v. Texas and Roe v. Wade. They have been on the right side of history. From defending the freedom of speech of Vietnam War protesters to fixing the privacy invasions of the Patriot Act, they are here for all Americans. But I am focused on Roe today because rolling back Roe is the canary in the coal mine for all of our freedom. It is the death of idealism. It is the death of the idea that all men are created equal. It's what it could have been. They came for Roe, and they will come for gay marriage. They will come for trans rights. They will come for privacy. They will come for the separation of church and state. They will come for the 14th Amendment, and they will come for every principle and every freedom that the best, most idealistic version of America suggests is possible. And I want to speak now to every cis man in this audience. I want to ask you to be angrier about this. You guys use willing wombs to form your families. Why are some of you sitting out this fight? Why aren't you marching with us? You have family, you have friends and children who may need an abortion. Do you think your wealth will protect you, the people you love? Look, it might. But if someone you love finds themselves within a topic pregnancy in a bunch of states in this country, it might not. Is that a bet you're willing to take? Will you sleep okay at night knowing there are millions without the financial means and opportunity that you have? There is an orphan 16-year-old crying herself to sleep in Texas, in Florida tonight, probably in Texas too. People will be forced to remain in cycles of poverty. People are terrified and they are dying. There are so many more Barbara Laframentos coming. There is a cultural sentiment long popular in America called male chivalry, and apologies for using binary terms, but men are supposed to protect women. They're supposed to carry heavy objects and open doors. As a woman, I will say that the only door I need opened is the door to equality, and the only heavy object that I need help carrying is the weight I am forced to carry because of the denial of my civil liberties. I deserve full freedom and equality. All people with wombs do. All LGBTQIA people do. All people of color, all disabled, impoverished, imprisoned, and immigrant people deserve to be treated equally. Every last one of us deserves full autonomy over our bodies and the freedom to build the families of our choosing, how and when we want to, if we want to. The best of what America can be is still possible, but it will take the majority of us to prioritize freedom for everyone with the same zealous, righteous indignation that the vocal minority have twisted and weaponized in order to curtail freedom and equality. We can be louder, we can be stronger, and we can win because we are empathetic, we are generous, and we are right. It is up to every one of us in this room to make this country what it can be and what it should be. Greg and I will keep telling stories that reflect the best of what we can be, the diversity, the strength, the joy, the full range of humanity. We do this because reflecting all experiences is our opportunity and our responsibility. Meanwhile, the ACLU will keep fighting for what we could be if we were our very best ideals. Thank you so much to the ACLU for all they do and for this award. And also a special shout out to my fiance, Daniel, who is spending his entire birthday here listening to Paula Poundstone and me. So thank you guys so much.